if you have particular concerns about security or governance issues, David Cameron has advised the governments of Iraq and indeed others on constitutional arrangements and what have you. Feel free to ask, and I may draw them into the discussion if I feel that your questions are relevant. But first, let me start with Art Hughs, who wanted just to make a very couple of minor points before we launched into the Q&A. There's.
Thank you, Michael. During the discussion, there were comments made about, on the one hand, that our concept of a special regime is special regime heavy. But then the question about what is the relationship of the Israeli and Palestinian citizens residing in the old city with their national governments. Well, our concept of a special regime is a special regime heavy, but delineate only the very specific areas. Security, property management, archaeology, that kind of thing. Those areas which constitute the main areas of friction between the respective residents of the old city. So it's special regime heavy, but only in very narrowly defined areas, specified areas. And in fact, our documentation says all the areas that are not specifically delineated for special regime authority remain with the national authorities of Israel and Palestine. And the second thing is there was some comments about religion. How do you deal with the religion? How do you deal with religious sites? And in a way, one could argue maybe we punted it to a certain extent, but I think where we came out is the most logical, and it's the cleanest, so to speak. And that is, what we suggest is that the management and operation and authority over the religious sites would all remain with the religious authorities who now have those responsibilities now, only as possibly modified by the governments of Israel and Palestine in their peace treaty. So that the management and control of the religious sites would remain as they are now, or as changed by the two respective national authorities in their treaty. Now, the one additional element to that is, of course, that the special regime is responsible for security. So we looked at security and we thought, well, now, how then could the special regime, the Old City Police Service, deal with security for the religious sites? And what we were suggesting there is that the religious sites, under the management of the present religious authorities, have the first responsibility for maintaining order, decorum, respect, and so forth. But there would be a special unit of the Old City Police Service that would interact with these religious authorities and would be available to them in cases of need in which their own wardens, so to speak, weren't able to manage. Another side element of this is that we see the Old City as a weapons-free zone except for the international members of the Old City Police Service. Now, I hope I have generated a few questions from all of that. Thank you very much.
What we've done is we've set up 2 microphones in the aisles, and we are so, I hope we have 2 microphones down here in the front row.
Apparently they couldn't make that happen.
Okay, it couldn't happen.
So we use one of these.
So we use one of those. Could I suggest then that those who have questions line up in the center row, and we'll use the second microphone to pass along here for those that may want to respond to particular questions. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Jerome Siegel, University of Maryland. I have 2 related things that I want to ask, but I want to sort of bring out how they're related. The first has to do with the larger package and negotiations, which hasn't really been raised, but there's a strain of thought that's been around for a long time that there's some kind of trade-off between what happens in Jerusalem and what happens in refugees, and that the harder the Israeli position has gotten on refugees, the more necessary it'll be for there to be something more that the Palestinians get on Jerusalem. In Geneva, to some extent, this is expressed by, as I read Geneva, giving the Palestinians sovereignty over the Temple Mount. In Olmert's proposal, 3 of the 5 countries that were going to administer it were Muslim countries. But this proposal, as I understand it, is completely balanced within the special regime. So one question is how it relates to the problem that a stiff position on refugees creates for Jerusalem. The other thing that I'll try to explain how it's related, Dan was talking about the importance of thinking about Jerusalem in a disaggregated way. I was the director of the major study on disaggregating Jerusalem that came out in a book called Negotiating Jerusalem, which some of you may be familiar with. When we disaggregated not just the outside, but we also disaggregated inside the old city. And what we were quite surprised by is to find that when you disaggregated by quarters, actually the attachments were very different and were similar to what we found outside. That is, the Palestinians were most attached to where Palestinians live, and the Israelis were most attached to where Jews live inside the old city. The only thing that you couldn't disaggregate was the Temple Mount. So the question is, why not confine a special regime to some extent to the Temple Mount? Now, if you bring these 2 components together, what I would be thinking would work or would be needed would be a special regime that in some sense tilts towards the Palestinians. Not as it were Palestinian sovereignty, but something where the Palestinians gain, as it were, dominant administrative or managerial control over the Temple Mount, reflecting the fact that it's whatever the Jewish attachment to it, which definitely predates it, nonetheless, give or take 100 years, for the last 1,500 years, it's been an active site of Muslim worship.
Gilad and Marshall.
First of all, I disagree with this equation of trade-offs between the issue of Jerusalem and the issue of the refugees. I think that the right way to approach that equation is that the refugee problem would be resolved by the establishment of the state of Palestine and of course the withdrawal from the main parts of the territories by Israel. Jerusalem has an internal trade-off within it. It has nothing to do with other trade-offs with other core issues. One of them is dividing the urban part of the city between east and west, Israelis and Palestinians, according to the Clinton parameters. And the other one is what has been presented here, which is self-contained. That's the old city special regime. I think that answers part of your question. As for the Geneva Initiative and the way it attempted to resolve the issue of the old city, I don't see any advantage to this kind of division that has been presented. And as a matter of fact, part of the motivation to start this project as early as 2003 or 2004 is the insufficient satisfaction that such a scheme proposes, which is dividing a very, very small area of less, as Ambassador Kurtzer just mentioned, less than 1 square kilometer or 870 dunams, to divide it between 2 conflicting authorities, even under a permanent status agreement, would be impracticable, and this is why this project is so important.